Ohio State's November 1st game against Penn State inside Ohio Stadium just got that much more interesting because it's going to have a former defensive coordinator of the Buckeyes on the other sideline. Jim Knowles will enter as an opponent for the first time in his life. Stefan, he has taken, I think it's $3.1 million to leave Ohio State for Penn State to be James Franklin's new defensive coordinator. Yeah. That's all I got for you.
It was, yeah, we should say, so as we're recording this, it's Sunday. The Eagles and the Commanders are playing right now. We just got home from covering Ohio State's championship celebration.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that was happening today.
You know, Ohio State won a national championship like 6 days ago as we're recording, and here we are with some major news on a defensive coordinator front. It's definitely surprising. I don't think a lot of people saw this coming, right? I know going into the championship and media days in Atlanta, Jim Knowles was asked about the opening at Oklahoma. There were some, reports surfacing that maybe he had some interest in that job. And kind of as the week progressed, Penn State got involved. I know Notre Dame's name came up after Al Golden left for the Bengals. And you could kind of start to see the writing on the wall, as Bob Stoops was on a radio show in Oklahoma, and one thing he said was there's kind of smoke around this situation with Jim Knowles, and he hasn't come out and said anything to kind of settle that smoke. Mm-hmm. And as the week kept progressing, we kept hearing other reports come up of other teams interested, other schools that he would maybe consider going to, and there was never really anything that made you think, okay, where is something from Ohio State's side, something from Jim Knowles' side that gives you full confidence that this guy is going to stay put with the Buckeyes. And we got a little bit of that on Saturday morning when reports surfaced. I think Bill Rubinowitz at the Dispatch, I think Andy Staples with On 3 had it as well, that Ohio State had offered Jim Knowles a bag to make him the highest paid defensive coordinator in the country. Mm-hmm. I think Martindale at Michigan is currently the highest paid. His salary is due to be about $2.75 this upcoming season. So you could tell right away that Knowles was going to get something in the $3 million range, and Ohio State was willing to match it. And I think from the Ohio State realm, I know from some of our texters on subtext, there was this sense of, okay, they offered him the money. They're clearly going to try to keep him. And I think there was some growing excitement that he was going to stay. I thought maybe I was reading into it too much at the time. It kind of felt to me like, here's Ohio State saying that they are trying to keep Jim Knowles, but it's not necessarily telling that he is going to stay. And as we found out Sunday, almost as soon as the celebration ended, the news started to break that he was leaving. You could kind of tell Sunday morning by reading some reports that it felt like the agents, the coaches, the people involved were kind of telling themselves, hey, let's let the celebration pass before we dominate the news cycle. And I don't think we even made it up back to the press box from being down on the field by the stage before the news started to break. So definitely surprising. And now it puts Ohio State in an interesting spot of going to get a defensive coordinator. It's January 26th as we're recording. This is kind of late again to be, doing coaching searches, right? A lot of teams, if they're making a change, by their own choosing, it's happening, before the bowl games begin and stuff like that. Like Ohio State's in an interesting spot now. The good news is that the portal's closed. Mm-hmm. So we're not just because there's this coaching change, we're not about to start seeing a bunch of players enter the portal and say, oh, we're leaving because Jim Knowles isn't here. So that's good news. And now Ryan Day's got an important hire to make.
So here's Jim Knowles' defenses since Ryan Day hired him. Of course, Jeff Hafley was his first defensive coordinator in 2019. He leaves for Boston College after a year, brings back Kerry Combs, who had been a cornerbacks coach for a long time at Ohio State to DC. They get to the national championship game, which I think that Natty getting there probably covered over some issues with that defense and plus COVID. So Ryan gave it a second opportunity. But by the end of the Oregon game, Kerry Combs wasn't calling plays anymore. He was a defensive coordinator by name and paycheck only. Matt Barnes takes over in play calling duties, and then we end up with Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles, 21 points per game allowed in 2022. That was 24th in the country. He improved from that to 11.2 in 2023. That was second in the country. And then this year, 12.9, which was first in the country. Yards per play, 5.18. That was 37th nationally. Went up to 4.17 last year. That was third nationally. And then 4.19 that led the country this past year. Passing yards per attempt, 7.2. That was tied for 66th in Jim Knowles' first year as a defensive coordinator. 5 yards per attempt was first in the nation in 2023, and then up to 6 yards per attempt. That was tied for sixth nationally this season. And then rushing yards per attempt, 3.52. That was 25th in the country in 2022. 3.44. That was 22nd in the country in 2023. And then this year, 2.65. That was second nationally. So you can see the gradual growth of a defense that, quite frankly, does take some years to master because it is pretty complex, which is why, and I know Stefan at cleveland.com/OSU has already started a little bit of a hot board of some names Ryan Day could consider. But do you think the name is already in the building? Matt Guerrieri, Ryan Day had some cool, interesting things to say about him during the celebration today, and that's a guy who has worked with Jim Knowles for a long time. He's not necessarily new to being a coordinator. If you've got a bunch of guys who have known this system and been working the system their entire careers, and you can just replace the guy who essentially invented the system with a guy who has spent 8 years learning the system,
Yeah.
I don't know, does that make things easier, especially when you're talking about, listen, Ryan Day's having to make this decision on January 26th. It's not like he's making this decision on December 26th.
Yeah, that would be the logical answer is Guerrieri getting promoted. Like you said, I mean, Dave spoke fairly highly of him at the parade. It almost kind of felt everyone who was kind of standing there listening kind of looked at each other, was like, he really went out of his way to hype this guy up, called him a rising star in the industry and things of that nature. So, yeah, his experience with this defense, with Knowles' defense, makes him kind of seem like the obvious candidate. I'm sure Ohio State will at least talk to some other guys. I think, you look at Hafley in the NFL, if he has any interest of coming back to college, I mean, Vic Fangio, the NFL numbers aren't as public as you get them in college, but Vic Fangio with the Eagles, I think is estimated to be the highest paid defensive coordinator in the NFL. It's like 4.5 mil. So Hafley's probably he's going to make less than what Knowles was offered to stay, right? So like if Ohio State wants to make that offer, they can financially go out and get a lot of people, even someone like Hafley, who's a defensive coordinator in the NFL. I think Brian Haynes at Indiana is another interesting name to watch. He was Broyles Award finalist with Kurt Cignetti at James Madison. Indiana had one of the better defenses in the country this year. Maybe he's a name to monitor. But in terms of internal, like if I were to say hunch feeling, who's the number one option right now, or who would be like the betting favorite, it's probably Matt Guerrieri, just because his knowledge with this defense, how seamless that transition would be, it all seems to fit. It's a lot easier to go out and hire a safeties coach, unless Guerrieri is DC and maintains that safety coach. But it's a lot easier to go get a safeties coach and promote a defensive coordinator than it is to go get a whole new defensive coordinator.
And Guerrieri isn't Jim Knowles in terms of description of Jim Knowles was here to coordinate the defense. He wasn't here to recruit and do any of that stuff, which is why James Laurinaitis being hired as the linebackers coach was such a big deal. I don't know if you have to take those necessary steps, especially when Tim Walton is technically the guy over the entire secondary. That probably gives you a little bit of a blanket if Matt Guerrieri can also be the safety coach and your defensive coordinator. Another name to throw out there, I'm just saying it. I'm just going to tell you a fact. It's not going to happen, but I'm going to tell you a fact. There is a former Ohio State secondaries coach just sitting around working for ESPN right now. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. He's just kind of sitting around. Who knows? Maybe he's got the itch again. He probably doesn't.
He's probably trying to be a commissioner right now. So.
Yeah. I'm all for it. Nick Saban for college football as commissioner. I'd sign me up yesterday for that. Regardless of what Jim Knowles is going to do, obviously, you only have 3 guys returning from your defensive starting unit from last year, and that's Caleb Downs, Davison Igbenogson, and Sonny Styles. So there was going to be a lot of turnover anyway. So if you were going to pick a time to have to pick a new defensive coordinator, you can make the case that this was the perfect time to do so because you are kind of starting from scratch with your defense. A lot of talent. Whoever ends up being that defensive coordinator, yes, it's going to be young and inexperienced, but you're not going to be lacking in talent with the way some of these guys have recruited over the last couple of years. We'll continue to talk about this on Buckeye Talk, so go listen to that wherever you find podcasts and get the text 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. When this news broke, that's the first place we went with it before anywhere else. For Stefan, I'm Steven. That's YouTube. Saban, I'm sorry. Whoa, sorry. See you later.